It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Javier Marín López. He's a professor of musicology of the University of Jaén in Spain. He's the artistic director of the Early Music Festival of Ubeda and Baeza, the vice president of the Spanish Society for Musicology, and former editor of Revista de Musicología. He received a PhD in musicology from the University of Granada and was recipient of the Extraordinary Doctorate Award. He is a major voice in the scholarship of colonial music and one of the leading voices in the study of polyphonic music from Mexico's cathedral. Marín López's scholarship focuses on Latin American and Spanish musical culture from the 16th to the 19th centuries, with particular emphasis on processes of transatlantic exchange in broader European and global contexts. Among multiple distinctions, he has received the Samuel Claro Valdez Musicology Award from Pontifical Catholic University of Chile and the Otto Meyer Serra Honorable Mention Award from the University of California, Riverside. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marín López.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It is truly an honor for me to be here. Thanks to Dr. Ana Alonso Minuti for all the work done for having me here. And I also appreciate the institutional support of several departments and centers, mainly the music department and the Latin American and Iberian Institute, as well as everyone involved in this activity. In particular, Dr. Michael Hicks, Dr. Ray Hernandez Duran, and Dr. Mary Quinn. When talking about musical performance, musicology usually concentrates on the study of performance practice, or the reconstruction of how past compositions sounded in their time, in a specific location or by a specific group of musicians. This univocal, ideal, and absolutist view of musical practice often ignores a fundamental dimension of interpretation, the sound of those past compositions nowadays and how they have been performed over time. When first defining this discipline, the so-called fathers of musicology established a single mode of documenting sound, the score. And this is where this field remained installed throughout most of the 20th century. In fact, this was hardly something new because it had been the case for centuries. The true and the most important musical work of any composer is the intellectual structure expressed in the written score, regardless of his sonic embodiment. Therefore, the alpha and the omega of music is not the sound, but the abstract relationship between the musical notes captured in a written document. In light of this assertion, one might ask if the score really contains all the elements of a work of art and whether it truly helps understand the complex semiotic relationship between the notated sound, his acoustic manifestation, and the way it is received. The invention of the phonograph established a new way of documenting music, recording its sound. So the score began to lose its monopoly as an element that encapsulates the work of art to share the spotlight with a purely acoustic document. This new medium is not only a means of transmission, but a manifestation in itself of a work of art. In fact, it is the most precise and univocal way of documenting music. Furthermore, unlike what happens in a concert hall, in recordings there are additional performers, the team of professionals who produce the recording, the silent performers as called by Martin Elste, who over time have used different recording and reproduction techniques. Each of these processes has a direct impact on the final sound result, even though there are certain trends in the aesthetics of sound recording that are independent of technological progress and of the technical possibilities of each medium. This brings to mind two relevant elements. One, a sound recording has two dimensions: the physical object or material support, and the sound recorded in it, so the waves or electronic digital data that can be stored and reproduced. And two, the performance trends of each historical moment are logically subject to the fashion and taste of each time. In this talk, I propose to rethink the role of recordings and their influence in the current musical life. It is clear that sound recordings questions two of the great myths linked to the world of music. The first one, the autonomy of the performers, so control over their art became part of record labels and engineers, and B, the concept of the work of art in itself. So the idea, the opposition, posed decades ago by Walter Benjamin, that of aura versus reproducibility, or in other words, the clash between the unique and unrepeatable nature of the work of art versus his reproduction and mass repetition. Through recordings, music loses its unreproducible essence, which implies a transformation in our way of perceiving it. Design of sound recordings, which covers everything related to their production, manufacture, and distribution, is known as discology, a concept that was coined in a pioneering article by Eric Valentin, who defined his three main spheres of action that are on the screen. The goal of this lecture is to offer an overview of how these ideas have impacted recordings of Latin American colonial music and their implication in the construction of the sonic memory of this repertoire. Before starting this analysis, it is crucial to define some basic categories. In short, Latin American colonial music is equated to early music of Latin America, which is an Eurocentric concept. For that reason, other authors prefer to speak of music of the viceroyalties, which implies more centrality and autonomy, although there were territories in Latin America that were not viceroyalties, such as Chile or Guatemala, making this term unrepresentative. Hence, the concept that has prevailed is that of colonial music. We refer to the music produced in what now is Latin America during the period of Iberian domination. Its timeline is flexible. It encompasses diverse styles from Renaissance to Romanticism, and it includes both the music imported by the colonizers and that composed locally in the context of clear asymmetry of powers. This map shows the territory in which this music was developed. In blue, the Portuguese area. There were also areas belonging to other European powers, but most of the territory belonged to the Spanish monarchy. A characteristic element of colonial music is his transversal presence in all spheres, spaces, and sectors of the new society. In streets and squares of cities, as part of the urban fabric, in official events like processions and so on, in domestic and private milieu with instrumental dances, songs, popular and courtesan parties, amateur musicians of the nobility, and so on. And it was, of course, cultivated by all racial groups. We are talking about Spaniards, Spanish, Criollos, descendants of Spaniards war in America, indigenous Africans, and the subsequent crossbreeds or castas as a way of imposition, appropriation, or cultural resistance. The conquest of Latin America was originally a spiritual conquest, and music played a key role as an evangelizing tool. Hence, the predominance of sacred music in white urban institutions of power located around the Plaza Mayor, like cathedrals, palaces, parishes, and convents. There is also evidence of vibrant musical activity in rural areas, in particular in missions, like here in New Mexico, and pueblos de indios or indigenous villages, where formal teaching of music was instituted at an early stage. There are many traces of this intense musical activity in documentary sources of several kinds. Here you have a couple of examples. On the left, music inventories, such as this one from the Cathedral of Mexico at the very beginning of the 18th century, and includes more than 1,500 villancicos, of which not even 5% is preserved today. On the right, a list of musicians, such as this one from the Cathedral of Mexico in the early 19th century, with a music chapel of 37 members, so a complete orchestra and choir. There are, of course, hundreds of musical works scattered in several Latin American and international archives that are still pending a systematic cataloging and study. As a refreshing Latin American version of European early music, colonial music is increasingly attracting the interest of researchers and performers from all over the world, and enjoys an emerging presence in festival programs and digital music platforms. This search has led to the release of many recordings, now numbering in the dozens, which allows us to identify a series of performance trends. One of the features of much of the colonial discography up to the 90s, and can still be found in some ensembles, is the following of performance standards derived from the European and Renaissance Baroque, in particular Italian and German, applying their criteria to the reality of the colonial world, which had little to do with the European one. It is not by chance but that many of the groups participating in this trend are European or Anglo-Saxon, although not all of them. In fact, one of the first recordings of colonial repertoires comes from Brazil, where in 1958 a collection of LPs began to be released with music by composers from the region of Minas Gerais, where a flourishing school of mulatto musicians developed during the second half of the 18th century. The Orquestra Sinfónica Brasileira recorded a misa by one of these composers from Minas, José Joaquín Lobo de Mesquita. It was performed by an amateur mixed choir accompanied by an orchestra with modern instruments, so the original instrument trend had not yet arrived to Latin America. Let's listen to a small excerpt. versions by British choirs have acquired legendary notoriety. During the 90s, they released several recordings that included colonial repertoire, among them this double CD by the Hilliard Ensemble, with a cappella voices, one singer per part, a predominance of higher registers and excellent intonation, has sung in their version of one of the hits of the colonial repertoire, the Nahuatl hymn Santa Maria. The recordings of the Tallis scholars and the 16 have an increased number of singers, but they maintain the spirit of the British sonority that we can listen now. Along the same line, one could include the CD of Ensemble Paraguay Barroco, made up of young Paraguayan musicians trained at the International Center Les Chemins du Baroque in France. Along with some concertos by Vivaldi and other Italian masters spread across Latin America, there is an instrumental cantona, a duo preserved in Cuzco, Peru. A modern performance archetype is imposed in this version, a fruit of an age where perfect recordings are part of our daily sound life, which are round, vigorous, and in-tune sound. One of the most recorded colonial composers is Ignacio Jerusalem, chapel master of the Cathedral of Mexico City and the best representative of the galant style in the Americas. The composer's fame owes much to this recording by Chanticleer, a male choir from San Francisco, which brings out the main Neapolitan features of the composer: translucent textures, short, graceful and varied melodies, and vigorous dotted rhythms. From the 90s onwards, the record market for colonial music became more international. Many Latin American ensembles emerged and released their productions locally. The performances criteria of these groups has been different according to their origin. The anthology Armonía Andina by Grupo Canto from Colombia presents the particularity of bringing to light the little that was known about the colonial music of Ecuador. For this recording, 2 Ecuadorian indigenous musicians were invited to play, with folk instruments and techniques, like indigenous violins with upside bows, quenacho, or bandolin. We will listen to Tucuy Mitic, a piece in Quechua and Spanish that bears a clear resemblance to present-day music of the Andes, or música andina. This is one of the first examples, as far as I know, of a currently popular phenomenon, the involvement of indigenous or popular musicians in early music ensembles.
Well,
A similar example can be found in the version for mixed choir of a well-known villancico, Los Cofrades de la Estrella, by Juan de Araujo, presented by Camerata Encanto from Bolivia, and to which zanfonias or pan flutes are added in this case. The inclusion of these Andean aerophones justified in the previous example, the Ecuadorian one, is more debatable here, since it is a villancico, a cathedral villancico, performed inside the Cathedral of La Plata, today's Sucre, where these instruments have not been documented. Percussion instruments played a key role in what I call the Elima sound, developed in the 90s by Gabriel Garrido's ensemble Elima. In Garrido's conception, a performance is far more than a neutral execution of the notes indicated in the source. In fact, it is a creative process that understands the score as a starting point for a completion of the piece. Some of the hallmarks of this tendency are the use of rather quick tempi, large ensemble and loud volume, little historical orthodoxy with timbres allowing an unusual prominence of percussion instruments, an exuberant continuum, and great emphasis on improvisation. All these traits confer great brilliance and vivacity to their versions, which are accentuated by a technical resource. Many of these recordings have a preference towards closeness and placing the listener in the position of the musician, so that the music is experienced from the inside, as an actor and not as a mere listener. One example of this is the anonymous 5-choir polychoral villancico Oigan Todos y Todas, which starts here with an instrumental improvisation that includes castanets. Elima's successful recordings laid the groundwork of what is known today as Latin American Baroque, which includes a great deal of early music fusion. This trend finds its theoretical justification in the notion of hybrid cultures proposed in the 90s by Néstor García Canclini, and is characterized by the use of indigenous instruments, natural voices without placement, and folk music improvisation techniques, which are mixed with the typical timbres of early music. One of the most clear examples is the Ensamble Tembembe from Mexico, which showed us that the current sones jarochos are direct successors of the so-called sones del país, cited in the archives of the Inquisition, since the 19th century. For example, the son jarocho, El Guapo, presents the same rhythmic harmonic pattern as the Baroque dance Los Villanos, copied in a guitar manuscript, the Saldívar Codex. We will listen one after another. First, the traditional song, so with singing, with voice. Then the Baroque dance, just instrumental with guitar. And lastly, the son jarocho again, mixing the typical strumming or rasgueo of the jarana jarocha with the more dotted and erudite style of the Baroque guitar. again emerged the son jarocho with different lyrics, a different copla. Another paradigmatic example is this CD by La Arpeggiata, which explores different genres of folkloric traditional Latin American music but performed with standard instruments from the Renaissance and the Baroque. Let's listen to their electrifying version of the Venezuelan joropo Pajarillo Verde, which opens with a virtuosic Renaissance corneto improvisation. The fascination with multicultural connections and apparently impossible combinations lies at the heart of the project by the Spanish ensemble Academia del Piacere and the flamenco singer Arcángel, who merged Latin American Baroque music with cantes de ida y vuelta, or back and forth singing. We will listen to the chorus of a 17th century villancico, Convidando está la noche, by Juan García de Céspedes, composed for the Cathedral of Puebla in central Mexico, but mixed with the guajira, a flamenco resembling genre of Cuban origin with which it shares the amalgamant beat and its harmonic pattern. It is a risky approach that would shock both flamenco and early music purists, but at the same time, it is a creative and original effort to establish a parallel between different styles, resulting in a new product that is neither Baroque nor flamenco, but rather a contemporary creation. Before listening to this last example, a couple of conclusive ideas. Talking about recordings is much more than talking about recorded music, as complex discourses under the same critical consideration as another text. Recordings are not innocent entertainment products, but expressions of a negotiation with the past based on interest, knowledge, and present stereotypes. They form performing canons, and construct communities and expectations that reveal values and attitudes. The conflation with identity matters, national, regional, or local, shows the never neutral character of this type of projects and its relationship with specific, ever-changing social and intellectual factors.
pensando en ti, vida mía. Quiero platicar contigo. Yo quiero platicar contigo debajo de un cocotero y para que sepas, linda trigueña, lo que yo a ti te quiero. Ay, para que sepas, linda trigueña, lo que yo a ti te quiero. Y para que sepas, linda trigueña, lo que yo a ti te quiero. Para que sepas, linda trigueña, lo que yo a ti te quiero. Y para que sepas, linda trigueña, lo que yo a ti.
Thank you. If there are any questions,